In Minnesota, a massive fraud scandal is gaining national attention. Federal prosecutors say at least $1 billion in taxpayer funds, money intended to feed children during the pandemic, was stolen in a widespread scheme.
At 4 hours, 12 minutes in the morning, an explosion tore through the night, marking the collapse of a monument. James Jack Holloway, once the most trusted person, suddenly came under suspicion of turning 5,329 former soldiers into inventory to profit $167 million. Those soldiers were sold to the desert like slaves, while their benefits were completely drained. According to some sources, it seems this was not just personal greed. The press speculates that perhaps Holloway was only one link in a more brutal network. What horrifying truth is being hidden? At 4:12 in the morning on December 29th, the silence of the night was torn apart. The walkie-talkies of the federal forces flashed in the darkness as FBI and ICE agents began closing in on a quiet suburban mansion. That was the home of James Jack Holloway, the man the entire nation once trusted with the solemn duty of protecting veterans. But what they found inside felt like stepping into a crypt built from stolen honor. Under the staircase, a secret basement contained $6 million in tightly wrapped cash, 20 property ownership deeds, and a leather-bound ledger listing 5,329 veterans marked as deceased or relocated. But the bone-chilling truth was that seemingly every name in that ledger belonged to people who were still alive. Men and women who had served, who had sacrificed, and who were then quietly erased from the system so their benefits could be silently drained. The agents stood there almost frozen. The weight of the betrayal was slowly seeping into their minds. This was not mere paperwork fraud. It seemed to be the architecture of a predator and the first crack in an empire built on the blood and bones of the forgotten. The real investigation began with a silence even heavier than the dawn raids. Robert Cal Whitmore, an Army veteran awarded a medal who had survived firefights in the Middle East, was found lifeless in his small home in Chicago. Next to him was an empty pill bottle and a folded denial of benefits letter placed on his chest. The system declared that his benefits had been exhausted. However, FBI auditors discovered $70,000 still intact in the account records. The last withdrawal had been signed not by Cal, but by James Jack Holloway himself. In that moment, the agents realized that Whitmore's death was not an isolated tragedy. It was a signal, a crack revealing a far darker pattern. The next chapter digs even deeper. The more the agents dug, the less the case resembled mere fraud, and the more it began to look like something predatory, cold designed and operated with the ruthless precision of an industrial machine. What should have been routine database checks turned into a descent through layers of rot. Inside the DEA evidence room, there was a laptop seized from a transporter linked to the criminal organization. When the analysts decrypted it, the screen displayed a header that left the entire room in stunned silence. United States Veterans Pipeline. Rows of names, dates, airport codes, amounts of money, and everywhere. Holloway's signature, glowed in red like searing burns on the paper. More than $167 million had been withdrawn from veterans' accounts and funneled through shell companies with innocuous names concealing a colossal corruption machine. The transfers flowed through Cyprus, Panama, and Belize before resurfacing within the financial arteries of the Sinaloa network. Holloway wasn't just laundering money through the system, he was feeding it. But what horrified the investigators wasn't the money, it was the pattern of disappearances. Over more than 18 months, 97 veterans, all struggling with psychological trauma, isolated and vulnerable, had been declared legally incapacitated. Holloway's justification files were clinical, almost surgical, high-risk, no next of kin, non-compliant. Just a few keystrokes, a forged signature, and a living, breathing soldier was suddenly transformed into a bureaucratic ghost. Their trails did not end at a clinic. They ended in the hidden flight manifests buried inside a private server at O'Hare Airport. The list entries were marked only with initials and destinations encoded as Dubai. When the investigators followed that trail overseas, the truth hit like a sledgehammer. Those so-called care facilities were nothing more than holding warehouses. Veterans had their identification documents stripped away and were handed over to construction bosses for $20,000 each, cheaper than a forklift and far more replaceable. Survivors described 16-hour shifts in 120-degree heat, sleeping on concrete floors, and hearing guards refer to them not as people, but as units. A rescued veteran whispered to the agents, "We weren't patients, we were inventory." 12 people were found alive. The rest seemed to have vanished into the desert without a trace uncounted. The evidence didn't just expose a corrupt official, it exposed the architecture of something monstrous. A pipeline built not for money, but to exploit human lives. And at the center of it stood the man the city once trusted to protect them. If you believe this pipeline must be exposed, hit like right now. By the time federal analysts finished mapping the veterans' pipeline, one undeniable truth emerged. Holloway's empire could not be dismantled with subpoenas alone. It required a war. And so at 3:58 in the morning, beneath a lead-gray sky, the largest veterans-related law enforcement operation in Chicago history was launched. Inside a dimly lit warehouse converted into a command center, 300 federal agents from the FBI, ICE, DEAD, HS, and VAOIG stood shoulder-to-shoulder, faces set hard, radios silent. A digital map glowed red with 14 target locations spanning 7 countries. Precisely at 4 o'clock in the morning, the order to move echoed through the room. "Iron brake is green. Execute." The world shifts. At 4:01 in the morning in the south side of Chicago, a fortified warehouse tied to Holloway's shell companies became the first battlefield. DEA raid teams detonated breaching charges, metal shrieking as the door blew inward. Gunfire erupted instantly. 2 enforcers for the criminal organization opened fire from behind stacked crates. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness. 1 agent went down, body armor cracked from the impact. The firefight raged for 6 brutal minutes. Shouts, ricochets, boots scraping on concrete. When the smoke cleared, 190 firearms were recovered, 42 kilograms of narcotics seized, and a ledger listing transfer approvals, every single one bearing Holloway's initials. Then at 4:07 in the morning in Henderson, Nevada, a luxurious townhouse belonging to Holloway's cryptocurrency broker became the next target. Agents stormed the second floor and discovered 40 hard drives, cold wallets, and a whiteboard mapping offshore accounts in Cyprus, Malta, and Dubai. On the desk lay a handwritten note, "JGH expects confirmation before the 15th. Don't miss it." That date matched an upcoming veteran transfer. Someone else had already been scheduled to disappear. At 4:11 in the morning in the El Paso corridor, ICE tactical units raided a logistics center used to smuggle veterans out of the country illegally. Inside, they found forged medical passports, oxygen masks, restraint straps, and a flight manifest for 17 patients scheduled to depart that week. On the wall behind hung a chilling directive, non-compliant units, sedate immediately. At 4:17 in the morning in Dubai's free trade zone, simultaneously, UAE authorities, guided by FBI intelligence, raided a construction camp where veterans were being forced to labor. Floodlights snapped on. Guards fled. 12 survivors stood trembling in the dust eyes, sunken skins, scorched by the sun. One whispered, "Is it over?" For most, the answer was not yet. At 4:23 in the morning in Chicago's financial district, the final strike hit Holloway's Overseas Coordination Office. Agents seized encrypted ledgers linking $340 million to criminal organization intermediaries and 34 international properties purchased with stolen veterans' benefits money. By 4:29 in the morning, Operation Iron Brake had erupted across 3 continents. By 4:31 in the morning, Iron Jack's empire began to crumble, but the man himself remained out there as dawn approached. If you stand with the agents who risked everything, hit like for them. By the time the gunfire faded and the final raid team reported clear, the federal agents knew the raids had only cracked the outer shell. The true machine of Holloway's criminal empire, its bloodstream, its heartbeat, its architecture was made of money. And money, unlike gunmen, doesn't know how to run. It leaves trails. Forensic accountants began where most empires end: offshore holdings. The first breakthrough came from a laptop seized in Nevada, an encrypted vault that the FBI's cyber unit took nearly 8 hours to crack. Inside was a portfolio holding $340 million, spread across accounts in Cyprus, the Cayman Islands, Malta, and Singapore. On paper, these companies appeared as investment branches designed to stabilize the veterans' benefits portfolio. In reality, they served as anchor points in a global money laundering network. Each property fulfilled one of two purposes: collateral for high-risk loans used to launder proceeds from illicit operations, or safe houses for intermediaries moving units, the trafficked veterans, through international hubs. What horrified the investigators most was how effortlessly the system operated. Every transaction, every signature, every approval appeared entirely legitimate. Holloway had exploited the one advantage that no organized crime accountant or offshore broker could ever buy: the trust of a federal office. When agents examined the VA's internal logs, they found hundreds of benefits accounts closed due to relocation, all within minutes of one another. The system never flagged a single one because Holloway had personally rewritten the alert parameters. For years, he had engineered an algorithm to conceal his crimes in real time, allowing millions of dollars to flow out while the veterans tied to those accounts slept in homeless shelters, cars, and abandoned rooms across Chicago. The cryptocurrency trail was even worse. A series of cold wallets recovered from a warehouse in the South Side revealed tens of thousands of microtransactions, all routed through mixers to erase their origins. But the mixers had failed to hide the timing. Every surge in incoming cryptocurrency perfectly matched the seizures of narcotics by criminal organizations at the border. The veterans' funds stolen by Holloway weren't just being laundered, they were synchronizing with drug revenue. Two empires fed each other, beating to the same rhythm like twin hearts. One detail sent chills down the agents' spines: a ledger titled Asset Flow Forecast, Q1 to Q3, projected more than $58 million in future transfers tied to newly identified candidates. A list of still living veterans, complete with full names, diagnoses, and estimated liquidation value. The killing blow came when Holloway's digital signature matched medical escort authorizations for private jets outbound overseas, corresponding precisely to the missing veterans now confirmed to have been funneled into Dubai's forced labor network. As dawn broke, the horrifying truth emerged: Holloway hadn't merely stolen benefits, he had turned trauma into collateral, industrialized exploitation, and commodified heroes. As the financial map of his empire gradually came into view, the agents realized a bone-chilling truth: no one could operate a machine. This colossal alone, the darkness branched even deeper into places where authority was supposed to be untouchable. Holloway hadn't merely exploited the veterans' benefit system, he had colonized it from the inside. The first cracks appeared at the Chicago Veterans Benefits Office. Internal audits uncovered counselors quietly flagging vulnerable veterans, single no next of kin, living in isolation, struggling with PTSD, then routing their files directly to Holloway, receiving anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 per case via untraceable prepaid cards. Some had referred dozens, even 73 victims. The digital logs revealed that Holloway rarely acted alone when declaring medical incapacitation. A contracted psychiatrist who had never met the patient signed off on 64 fraudulent rulings over 2 years using copy-pasted assessments labeled high-risk bad debt, feeding the human trafficking pipeline. The corruption even reached O'Hare Airport, where customs officers secretly cleared private flights carrying sedated veterans. Surveillance cameras captured gurneys being wheeled through maintenance corridors instead of public terminals. The logs showed that a single supervisor had approved all 17 outbound international flights tied to the missing veterans. His bank accounts held unexplained deposits totaling $420,000. City officials were far from innocent. At the Chicago Department of Licensing, 3 administrators had authorized zoning waivers for care facilities that upon raid turned out to be empty shells. No beds, no staff, no equipment, just hollow structures used to launder paperwork before the victims vanished overseas. Each waiver required multiple signatures. All 3 administrators had traveled to Dubai within months of granting the approvals. Then came the discovery inside the seized database of the criminal organization, a list of reliable influencers. These were individuals in key government positions who could expedite paperwork, reroute shipments, or clear red flags. Some were minor clerks, while others held senior authority. Together, they had formed a protective network shielding Holloway's operations from every angle: legal, medical, financial, and logistical. The most alarming evidence emerged from the encrypted messages recovered in Nevada. Holloway maintained direct contact with a Sinaloa logistics coordinator requesting new inventory assessments and candidate availability forecasts. Each message reduced human lives to quotas. The corruption network stretched far beyond imagination. A Houston port inspector cleared 3 containers of fake medical equipment used to sedate kidnapped veterans. New York loan officers rushed to approve mortgages for Holloway's shell companies despite glaring inconsistencies. A retired federal judge dismissed early allegations, prematurely shielding him during the initial stages. What chilled the investigators most wasn't the sheer number of accomplices, but the normalization of the crime people treated signing off approvals, overlooking paperwork, or simply forgetting a veteran as just another routine task within the very system meant to protect them. By the 6th week, the task force realized that Holloway was only the architect. The network had become self-sustaining, self-perpetuating, and self-protecting. The deeper they dug, the greater the dread grew. If there were so many complicit parties, how many others were still lurking in the shadows, ready to reboot the operation the moment he fell? The cold Chicago dawn illuminated an empire that still stood firm, and James Jack Holloway remained at large. At 6:47 in the morning, 2 FBI surveillance vehicles tracked Holloway's Lincoln Navigator as it pulled into the driveway of a modest brick townhouse on Milwaukee Avenue, a safe house registered under a shell company. He stepped out with the familiar calm cultivated over decades of government press conferences, showing no panic or haste, still convinced of his invulnerability. That illusion shattered in seconds as agents swarmed in barking commands and drawing weapons. For the first time in months of investigation, Holloway hesitated mid-calculation, his eyes flicking toward the briefcase containing the encrypted wallet flight manifest and details of 19 additional veterans scheduled for relocation by the end of the month. Handcuffed, he offered no resistance, only a long sigh, as if finally acknowledging the end of a long-running performance. But the real calculation unfolded inside the operations room. The files recovered from Holloway's townhouse revealed something far worse than anticipated: a succession plan. If he were captured, his network would automatically trigger withdrawals from inactive veterans' accounts, initiating new laundering cycles without requiring his signature. Offshore brokers held standing orders to liquidate assets. Criminal organization partners were instructed to accelerate their intake schedules. Holloway hadn't expected to fall, but he had prepared for the world to keep bleeding even after he went down. Across 7 countries, arrests cascaded through the morning in Dubai. 4 construction foremen were detained. In Cyprus, a private banker attempted to destroy records before Interpol stormed in. In Houston, the port inspector was captured while trying to flee by boat with containers of fake medical equipment. By 10:10 in the morning, a total of 143 suspects had been taken into custody. Yet the victory felt hollow. The ledger recovered from Holloway's basement listed 62 veterans still missing, scattered across deserts, construction sites, and black market labor camps identified only by numbers. The prosecutors announced charges of fraud, human trafficking, embezzlement, and international criminal conspiracy, unleashing a wave of public outrage. But within the task force, fury mingled with a grim realization Holloway wasn't an exception, he was a symptom of the system. A handwritten note from his journal read, "The system rewards efficiency. I simply applied it." By 11:54 in the morning, in the silent interrogation room, he gave a faint smile and asked the agents, "You think this ends with me? Find the others or don't. The system will replace them one way or another." That wasn't a threat. It seemed more like a blueprint. And as the chapter on Iron Jack drew to a close, a heavier truth settled over the investigation. His empire had collapsed, but the darkness that allowed it to exist remained alive, still spreading, and perhaps still waiting for its next architect. At the heart of this investigation lay a lesson not merely about corruption and betrayal, but about the power of institutions that refuse to look away. Because for every signature Holloway forged, for every veteran he tried to erase, there were men and women inside the FBI, ICE, DHS, and federal investigative units who held the line, who refused to let silence become policy. The lesson drawn from this tragedy is the need for vigilance toward systems that lack transparency. When trust is misplaced, the price paid is not just money, but the very lives of the vulnerable. Our indifference is sometimes the very soil in which evil takes root and thrives. According to some sources, the Holloway case proves that unchecked power will inevitably morph into cruelty. It seems many corners of the truth remain shrouded and unexposed, and online communities believe we must speak out to safeguard justice. The final chapter on Holloway is closed, but it seems the darkness hasn't fully dissipated. With hundreds of millions of dollars and 62 veterans still missing, online communities believe this is only the tip of the iceberg. Could Holloway alone have manipulated the entire system, or do suspicions about hidden figures still linger? Leave your comment below. Has justice truly been served? In your opinion, who is really behind it all? Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.